Okay. As I indicated earlier, Dean had sent out an email that got me scratching my head, and I thought maybe I should try to give some sense. And I know this is probably not something that is going to ring the chimes for most of the underground community, but it will give you kind of a background sense of the issue of the security of geospatial data and how things have evolved in the United States to be where we are at this point in time. So here we go. The reality is prior to 9/11, the United States really only had one principal mapping function for internal to the borders of the United States, and that's the Us Geologic Survey. So you'll hear USGS get tossed around the rest of it. That's a science organization. And for maybe some of you that aren't aware of it, Wesley Powell, first guy to go on the Grand Canyon, he was the first leader of that organization. They're primarily interested in topography, geology, volcanoes, earthquakes, plants, animals, with a marginal interest in infrastructure. And so in that upper left-hand corner there, I'm just showing something that most outdoors individuals have used in the past, and that's the USGS topo map. And that gives you, a fairly robust operating area to get good sense of terrain and the rest of it. And for those that would like to have just a little tidbit in their back pocket, buildings on a USGS topo map are placed there with 10-meter accuracy, and the first release of civilian GPS had 10-meter accuracy. So there's actually some logic in line up there. In the utility sector, the geospatial world was largely focused on the conversion of paper to GIS. And then when we had big airplanes flying into big buildings, the outcome of that effort largely amounted to the light bulb went on across all levels of government that, lo and behold, 80% of infrastructure is in civilian hands. And so now we got to start thinking about how do we get, I don't mean we, I mean, how does government get a sense of what's out there, and from that sense of what's out there, figure out how do we go about protecting it? Well, the scramble starts in 2002, and kind of what I wandered on down here is first kind of step in all of this was the Department of Homeland Security was created. So I'm going to just walk across these symbols up here at the top. And the very first thing that kind of came out of the gate was the issuance by what has become basically the Transportation Security Administration of sensitive security information, SSI. And that was the thing that Dean was asking about is, do we fall under any of this stuff? Well, the intent of, the SSI information that I'm aware of, and there may be some offshoot, I went and looked at the code that, about this, but it allows the TSA to be able to share intelligence without security clearances. And if you think about it, there's tens of thousands of air crew, and you got to be able to communicate to them about, a bomb's going to look like, it's got a timing device, it's got, ignition source, and it's got something that's going to blow up, and here's what it looks like when it's down a guy's pants, as an example. So then what followed after that was the thinking kind of got turned on. Hey, I wonder if we could get the civilian owners of infrastructure to tell us about their infrastructure. And so basically this critical infrastructure information program got started up, and that's this, you'll hear people talk about PCII information. And that's a closed off thing where a utility or whatever will go in and tell them something about, like we're located here and we've got the ability to generate X number of kilowatts or whatever the case. Well, that didn't go so good. It still exists, but folks were kind of reluctant to provide that information. So then we wandered into this thing with this Homeland Security Presidential Directive 7, which created this critical infrastructure key resources program. And what that's all about is a guy lives down in the basement of HSEM, the Homeland Security Emergency Management Agency, and that's for the state of Minnesota. And basically through working with county emergency managers, they attempt to identify within their area of, the county that they're responsible for, what might be the, the critical infrastructure of key resources, like, Viking Stadium, because of issues that might come up with that. So there's some other folks here started wandering around trying to make things happen too. The Department of Defense created this thing called a state profile. And if you're not familiar, it's based on what's the CIA does, and that's known as a country profile. And that's available out in the open. It's open source and basically walks through and tells you all about a country. Well, kind of the same thing goes on with state profile, and like what might be a major threat that's going to maybe require the Department of Defense to get involved in the state of Minnesota would be if the levee breaks over at Devil's Lake, North Dakota, because the volume of water that would come out of there would make some of the spring flooding that we've seen in the Red River Valley look like amateur land. And then the FBI, of course, they've got a criminal element to what they're interested in. And so the FBI started wandering around trying to create this outreach effort that's known as InfraGard to connect with the civilian sector, and in it to be able to do an attempt to stop cyber attacks, and if they happen, then be able to figure out, okay, who did this to us? Well, what about this geospatial thing? Some folks started, after these other programs are starting to roll along, they're now starting to think about, well, what are we going to do with that? Well, believe it or not, one of the first efforts to try to put a finger on critical infrastructure happened right here in the state of Minnesota with Dr. Tom Eber over at the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. And the Dairy Q symbol is up there for a reason. And what they figured out over at the DNR was, if we can get imagery of a wildland fire and the direction it's headed, we're going to have a place to hand off that imagery to the wildland firefighting crew. And wouldn't it be a good idea if, while they're waiting around, if they have a chance to get something to eat? So the very first thing that got built into this database was the location of Dairy Queens. And then it expanded to fire hydrants and all the rest of it. Well, sort of the principal event in all of this stuff that went on is this 2004 RAND study, which is called Mapping the Risk, Assessing the Homeland Security Implications of Publicly Available Geospatial Information. And basically they concluded out of that, hey, there's a lot of stuff drifting around out here in the public. We're going to have to figure out a way to maybe shut some doors on stuff. Well, the National Pipeline Mapping System was one of the poster childs. And anybody that dug around on the internet back then, I mean, you could find out all the details about every speck on a dam and where there were cross-loading points for, I forget what the proper name is for, like moving from water freight to land freight, so on and so forth. Well, so they started, this thinking inside the federal government, we got to do something to get better control of what's going on here. Well, right about then, February 2005, Google Maps becomes available, and everybody goes, whoa, look at the level of information that's just freely available. Well, so the feds are thinking they're going to take over this thing and run everything. So what they launched with, if you go to this Homeland Infrastructure Foundation level data working group website, the four organizations or four parts of the federal government, the Department of Defense, the Department of Homeland Security, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, which actually lives under the Department of Defense, and that USGS thing I talked about earlier, which lives in the Department of Interior, all got together. And originally the USGS was like massively mad. And so that's the reason I've got that 2002 to 2005 that, hey, knowing where stuff is and mapping it, that's our responsibility. Well, DHS and the rest of them are kind of pushing USGS to the side by 2005. And this data program gets launched. And the way it gets sent out, or the data itself is made available, is through this thing called the Homeland Security Infrastructure Program, or HSIP. And what this is the Department of Homeland Security pays the vendor community to go out and create a data sets that they in turn distribute nationwide, and they pump into the federal systems as being the definitive data sets. Now, here's the foot stomper. If you're ever watching TV and, looks like everybody in the world in the federal government knows where stuff is. Now, this is just me talking. It's a joke. So here's the deal. They distribute two different versions of what is supposed to be the definitive data sets for the United States. This thing called HSIP Gold has 450 some data layers in it. It goes down to things like turkey farms. That's the level of specificity that's in this data set. And it's labeled for official use only. But the reality is the difference between the 450 data sets and the 260 some data sets, for instance, airports, which you could easily go to the FAA website and pull down, but it's been made available to you in one spot. The difference between the two of them is that on the gold, there's an additional payment that the Department of Homeland Security has to make for that set of data to be released to an individual. So it's extremely restricted, and it only becomes available largely to people in the field or whatever when something big, bad, and ugly happens. So for practical reasons, there are really only the HSIP Freedom available. Well, they've got these other programs out there called Highfield to the Regions, which is Booz Allen Hamilton running around, thinking they're collecting data. And then there's the Homeland Security Information Network, which is a system which all of this data gets displayed in a geospatial interface. And once again, it's garbage in, garbage out. So Geospatial Enabling Community Collaboration is a program that GITA had running for a long period of time, and I was intimately involved in that. And that's a Department of Homeland Security effort to try to do outreach to the emergency services sector to get them to be able to be more conversant and be able to use geospatial data more effectively. Okay, so here's the foot stomper. The data we're talking about, this Homeland Infrastructure Foundation level data, is the definitive set of data for inside the borders of the United States. It's rolled up by these four large organizations through this collaborative. Right now, they're posting 25 categories of data, and you can see them laid out there. For instance, under food industry, you'd be able to find the location of where the General Mills plants are. But take a look at, the most current sleeve cover that I had an image of for HSIP Gold from 2012. It tells you that it's unclassified and it's for official use only. Again, the most definitive data set that the federal government has available for inside the borders of the United States. So the last kind of slide here before I do the takeaways is to just kind of give you a sense of, because geospatial capabilities have been evolving, and at the same time, our enemies are becoming more and more interested in it. In 2018, this became kind of a wrap-up item where the Department of Homeland Security merged their cybersecurity effort with their information security effort under this Infrastructure Security Agency Act. And one of the things that triggered that's that first bullet up there at the top. For those of you that aren't familiar with it, our opposing military organizations have hacking teams that's the only thing they do is run around trying to get whatever they can on civilian infrastructure. And one of the big ones that was revealed was one of the Shanghai Chinese military units hacked into Schneider's Electric's supervisory control and data acquisition systems for Canada. And there were multiple companies up there that got all of their SCADA, and which is very similar to a GIS management system for infrastructure. You can turn stuff on and off with it. So that got hacked. And there you go. So kind of the last thing on this slide here is the Department of Commerce actually now has, through their national Institute of Standards and Technology, they also have an outreach program. So there's kind of two things there going on relative to specific to the utility sector. On one side, you have the Department of Homeland Security and you have the Department of Commerce trying to talk to people about how to harden their systems. Okay, so that takes us to the takeaway slide. And if I can find a way to click it. All right, here are the key takeaways. There are no laws prohibiting the sharing of geospatial data, at least on the federal side. And if they exist on a state level, I'm unaware of them. There are, however, numerous efforts to encourage structural security of the data containers and mechanisms for the exchange of data. So it's a subtle nuance, but it's an important one. It's not about protecting the data. It's about making sure that the methods which move the data around or hold the data are secure. In my opinion, the onus for the container should be on the utility. As I just mentioned here with the issue of NIST and what the Department of Homeland Security are doing, they should be working to implement the suggested ways forward to harden their systems. However, the onus for the exchange should be a function of the Fusion View final build. So that needs to be in our final consideration of where we end up here. Making sure that we are as compliant as we can be to the current standards for security. And I know at least a couple of the people that are right now already involved in trying to build toward that are acutely aware of doing what they can do to make sure things are locked down. Now, the next bullet is no revelation, I think, to anybody that's been on these calls before, but current data sharing restrictions are artificial. Some examples. Classic one is, if a county or a city is running their utility and they're looking at data as something they can sell because they had to pay for this GIS stuff to get the data collected in the first place, they're not going to give it to you for free. So, that's a government thing. Protecting government from paying excess licensing fees. So I already mentioned that about HSIP. And then finally, the competitive advantage. We're all acutely aware of that one also, that people don't want their stuff out in the open domain where, Joe Utility can come along, grab it, and gain a competitive advantage. All right, so it takes us down to the last one. And I think this is the most important of all. The bounding box concept and registered user approach will effectively make data access more controlled than what the federal government's gold standard geospatial data program is already, and that's this HSIP gold thing. More exactly, such an approach will be better than for official use only. anybody that's familiar with official use only, that kind of becomes a joke thing, and you can find more official use only stuff out in the public than you can shake stick at. So this is the reality of where we are with this thing. And I want to just basically, as best I can, put people's minds to rest that there really is not a undercurrent of needing to worry about the security of data within what we are trying to do. So with that, floor's open to questions, comments, additions, whatever. I don't claim to be, total expert here, but a lot of stuff has evolved since I was up to my elbows working in it. Any questions?
Just a comment that I think this was really timely that we talk about this because, as you mentioned, Dean has brought this up a couple of times on his committees. So could you just send this presentation right to Dean so that he gets it? I know he's not on today.
Yeah, I'll clip it out.
You'll post it.
Yeah, clip it. I'll post it and send him the link.
Yeah.
Yep. Anything else? Okay.
Great presentation.
Yeah, hey.
Very interesting stuff. A lot of good information there.
This is Tom DeWitt with Esri. You guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
So I got a question for you. Have you checked with the gas and hazardous liquid industries? Because my understanding is TSA has put the onus on those guys in terms of data and basically threatened them to behave or secure their data or else.
Yeah.
So I don't know if they can share their data with that threat.
Yeah, I have to be honest with you, Tom, I'm a little bit on the blind side with that, given the fact that gas, oil, liquid petroleum products are in fact a transportation item. They are going to fall under the Department of Transportation and have some oversight by TSA. Do you have anybody you think that we should dial in and think about having a discussion with? Is there maybe as I remember, there used to be an institute out of Chicago, but they may have.
They're still around. The Gas Technology Institute would be good, or the American Gas Association.
Yeah, I'll do a follow-up with them because, again, this, as I indicated, since about 2018, this thing's been evolving at a speed which, unless you live in it day by day, you're not going to know the nuanceical stuff that's going on. But good point. The Gas Institute, and what was the other one?
American Gas Association.
Okay.
Gas Technology Institute.
Yep. Got it. I'll do it. Thank you for the comment. Appreciate it, Tom. Okay. And with that, going once, going twice, gone.